So good morning, everyone. We are now launching the fourth day of the 2022 Refugee and Immigrant Volunteer Summit, sponsored by Reestablish Richmond, the Sacred Heart Center, and the International Rescue Committee. We're so glad that you are here. Today's opening session focuses on family reunification and the Afghan parole situation. It's described as a deep dive of the current Afghan refugee situation and many attendant issues. Our presenter is Diane Sheehey. Diane is the immigration attorney and senior program officer at the International Rescue Committee. So her knowledge in this field is vast. We look forward to hearing and learning from you, Diane. Welcome.
Thank you, Margaret. I'm happy to be here. I am eventually going to share my screen to show you a PowerPoint. And I thought what I would do is present the PowerPoint in two parts. The first part is a very quick overview of the resettlement process that the IRC does, and then I'll pause for questions. And I will go through this quickly because it's not the immigration section. And then I will move on to the immigration session. Okay, so are we good with that? Okay, excellent. And it's just a matter of figuring out how to share my screen, which I know how to do. Okay, Helen, please nod your head up and down if you can see. Okay, excellent. So this is about welcoming the Afghan parolees to Richmond. So far, Richmond has welcomed 110 new families since the beginning of October. And with spouses and children, it is over 330 people over a very short period of time. Our normal resettlement and processing services provide housing for the families, and I'm happy to report that in Richmond, the majority of the families are housed, although there are some still living in extended stay hotels due to housing shortages, quite frankly. So we also help with school enrollment and medical care referrals, helping the parolees receive their vaccines, referrals for psychosocial issues, medical issues, and Richmond has now an intensive case management program. So for people who arrive with greater than your average medical issues, there is a special caseworker who is assisting those people. We also provide, we empower people that we resettle to understand basic food and nutrition services in the United States, including signing up for SNAP benefits. And this group of Afghan parolees are entitled to SNAP benefits due to a presidential determination that was made. And also they are entitled, if they qualify, which most do, to Medicaid, same basic social services that refugees and SIVs may access. And then also we provide employment services. And I will talk more about employment authorization later, but the parolees should all at this point have employment authorization documents. There have been some hangups for some, and the caseworkers are working on that. So on the resettlement side, there are current opportunities for volunteers to assist. And I basically just cut and pasted from our IRC Richmond website. So if you know anybody who would like to help with home setups, or even just take families out on an outing, you may sign up at a link on our IRC Richmond website. And then looking towards the future, there are additional volunteer opportunities, such as helping the parolees, adults with job readiness, and then also financial literacy and English services too. We have a community engagement officer, and I will leave the screen up for a little while. This would not be for volunteering for immigration. This would just be if you are interested in assisting the parolees in any of the areas that the prior slides mentioned. But there is also a home program that Cody can explain, where organizations and groups of people can help sponsor a family, basically. And so Cody would be the person to reach out to for that. Okay. All right, questions about the resettlement process? And I will look in the chat. If we volunteer, are interpreters available? It depends on what you are volunteering for, but in general, no. Actually, I don't know the answer to that because I don't know how the resettlement side works with their volunteers. In immigration, if you're an official IRC volunteer, then yes, you would be provided immigration interpreter services. So I'm sorry, I don't have more than that. Any other questions about the resettlement side? Okay, great. I'm going to get into the immigration part of it. Okay, so the immigration status of Afghan parolees, well, they were paroled. They didn't enter with green cards. They did not enter with a visa. And so what is parole? Parole is just a temporary permission to be in the United States. It does not lead to immigration status. It does not lead to a green card. You could think of it as just maybe entering almost like on a tourist visa, but there's not even a visa involved. Now, all of these parolees did enter through a port of entry, which is immigration jargon. That means they were interviewed by a Customs Border Protection agent, and their biometrics were taken, fingerprints, facial recognition, etc. So, but I need to reinforce that parole is only temporary. And this group of people who entered through Operation Allies Welcome were given a 2-year temporary stay as of the day they arrived on the military base. Parole does not mean that you have automatic employment authorization. Once you receive parole, you may request employment authorization. And in fact, on the military bases, those requests were processed. It is discretionary for the Department of Homeland Security to grant the authorization. And in this particular situation, it was pretty much automatic. Once the biometrics and the national screening issues were processed, the employment authorization cards were generated. There are some conditions on parole for this group of people. So everyone needs to receive certain vaccines and a tuberculosis test. Same process if you entered the United States as a refugee or with a visa. And when I use visa, I mean a permanent visa, like a green card. And The parolees, just like everyone who is not a US citizen, but is here in the United States, must notify USCIS of a change of address within 10 days. And that just seems like such a simple administrative issue, but people always forget. And the big problem with that is if USCIS wants to get in touch with them or send them a notice, then USCIS doesn't know where they are. In order to maintain parole status, of course, everybody has to obey law, like the US laws. So it'd be possible, I mean, there is a potential that if anybody here on parole has a significant incident involving the criminal justice system, that person, the parole would be retracted, withdrawn. Again, as I mentioned, normally parolees they have a very high bar to be able to receive employment authorization, but there was a directive to make this process more easy for the parolees. And again, it's a limited period of employment. It coincides with their period of parole. So all the parolees who entered, who are still in parole status, have parole status that ends probably, depending on when they arrived, August, September, October 2023, including their employment authorization. And once again, it's a two-step process. You have to first get the parole, and then you have to get the employment authorization. If a parolee travels outside the United States without first submitting some special paperwork and getting it approved, the parole automatically terminates. This is important, especially if people go into Canada, because that is traveling outside of the United States. Okay, so here is what everybody has been waiting for. How can the parolees obtain a valid immigration status in the United States? And what is the IRC process for figuring that out? Currently in Richmond, we have hired a Dari and Pashto speaker as a new immigration legal assistant. Soraya, she is already working with the parolees. And we have a second one, a second person who also speaks Dari and Pashto. His name is Nasib. He will begin work at the end of February. He's currently on IRC staff working as a case aide. And so Soraya is speaking to all the parolees who are over the age of 18 who arrived and screening them, obtaining some basic information. And then I review the screening and we issue recommendations to the parolees as to how they can get their immigration status. At this point, the parolee is not an official IRC immigration client. That can only exist if there is a path to a green card that we currently have capacity to assist with, and then we enter into a legal service agreement with the parolee. We have entered into such legal service agreements with some of the parolees to assist, but at this point, we're mostly in the gathering of information stage. And so what are those paths? Well, they're limited. Some of the parolees came to the United States and they were already in that special immigrant visa process. A lot of you maybe have seen the green cards from the Afghans who have resettled in Richmond, and they have SQ in their category. That SQ category means that they had worked for the Department of Defense or as an interpreter in Afghanistan for at least 1 year during a certain time frame, and they went through a painstakingly long process to get their green card. Because of the sudden withdrawal, that process was interrupted. And so people are here living with us in Richmond who need to continue that process. A few of the people with whom I have spoken were beneficiaries of family petitions, spouses who were in the process of getting their green card at Kabul for an interview. And again, that got interrupted. So they were able to be evacuated. I have employer sponsored down in parentheses because this is an entirely different area of immigration law than the one with which I practice. And it's tricky and it's convoluted, and it's basically if somebody is in the United States with current permission and there is a job opportunity available for them and an employment visa available, then the employer can sponsor. We are not taking referrals for those. It's just, it's an entirely separate area of law. Private attorneys have that covered. It's expensive in it, but it's also employer initiated, employer funded. And then finally, there's asylum, which I will say is less than ideal for a variety of reasons, and I'll speak to those during the Q&A. But, you know, fingers crossed, let's all be hopeful. Let's all contact our senators and representatives on the national level, because Congress could pass a law that grants the parolees a path to a green card. And then as a quick temporary fix, the Department of Homeland Security could do something. So let me explain that. Oh, I'm sorry. First, let me go back and explain the SIV process really briefly, because Reestablish Richmond has graciously provided some volunteers to assist with some of these processes. So the SIV process, like I said, it's supposed to occur within a certain amount of time. I think it's 9 months. And knowing, as you all do, our government, this is not the case. The first step in the long process is to request a chief of mission. The abbreviation is COM, and it's basically a process where the contracting authority, the boss of the employee verifies that yes, this person worked for the Department of Defense or as an interpreter during these dates. Sounds really easy to obtain. Unfortunately, it's not, because many of the Department of Defense contractors are no longer in business. So once, and I will say that this is the biggest hurdle, the first step. Once that is received, the second step is to send an email with what you received in the first step and a form, and you request conditional SIV status. And then when you receive that, the third step now for this population is to apply for a green card inside the United States. The normal process would have been for the family to go to the Kabul embassy, I'm sorry, the US Embassy in Kabul, and then go through the interview process, and they would have been given a visa. They would have gotten off the plane in the United States, and a green card would have been mailed to them. But at this point now, they can apply for it in the United States. And so we do have some current Reestablished Richmond volunteers who, with permission of the parolee, assist with the first step and then possibly the second step. And I can speak to that during the Q&A. All right, but the reality, right? It's all about the reality. So this CIV process may take longer than the 2 pardon me, the 2 years, the 2-year period for which the parolees have permission to be inside the United States. Before the arrival of the parolees, there were 18,000 active cases in the backlog. And so you can only imagine how much that number has increased because, you know, what, 88,000 people have just arrived. And based on my screening, many of the people who were screened for national security issues and were allowed to enter the United States are actually ineligible for SIV status. So unless they were a beneficiary of a family petition and the visa was current, at this point, their only path to a green card is to file asylum. And I mean, asylum, if I talked about asylum, it would take another entire hour about all the inefficiencies and the burdens on the asylum applicants and the trauma that they have to, you know, go through again during their interview. And I will speak to that during the Q&A. Okay, so what can the government do? The government could pass an Afghan Adjustment Act, right? That would take an act of Congress. You know, that term really has significant meaning to us now, doesn't it? An act of Congress. But there is precedent for such acts. You know, there was the Cuban Adjustment Act following the Vietnam War. There were adjustment acts put in place. And then following the Iraqi war, there were various bills pushed through Congress through the Appropriations Act and also the Defense Act to provide for a green card process for certain people who are allowed to enter the United States on parole. So if anybody says, oh, this has never been done before, it has been done before. It has been done. This is not ideal, but I think many of us know about temporary protected status. And the Department of Homeland Security could designate a crisis in Afghanistan such that people who are currently in the United States as of a certain date would be able to receive temporary protected status. There are criteria having to do with criminal infractions and also, yeah, I mean, basically there are the same security issues that are resolved when people apply for TPS. And the reason that it's a little bit better than having parole is the form that you submit to request temporary protected status is easier. The government could allow for fee waivers or even grant a blanket fee waiver for TPS. And you can file your request to renew employment authorization at the same time. And if you, and Congress can, I'm sorry, there can also be published in the Federal Register through the Department of Homeland Security, automatic employment extension. But you know, this would just, in my opinion, be a Band-Aid. I will say temporary protected status, just like parole status, does not lead to a green card. It is just, it's debatable about whether or not it's even an immigration status, but it is just temporary. Reuniting with family. If people are currently in parole status, they may not file a family petition. Family petitions are only available for United States citizens and green card holders. I know that some of you have heard about humanitarian parole, and Reestablish Richmond really rose to the occasion and provided training to volunteers to help families request humanitarian parole for their family members left behind in Afghanistan. And USCIS has received, I think, the over 44,000 requests for humanitarian parole. I know I'm being recorded, and so I'm going to just say I just pulled that number out of my memory, so we would have to double check on that. And very few have been granted. The big issues with using humanitarian parole to enter the United States, this type of humanitarian parole, is that there has to be proof of individual threat of harm or actual harm to the person in Afghanistan, not just a general threat. The person who is being threatened or was threatened in Afghanistan would not be able to obtain the FOIL, the permission, the paroles, paperwork to enter the United States inside Afghanistan, because we no longer have a diplomatic presence in Afghanistan. And humanitarian parole is not meant to skirt the normal process of applying for refugee status outside the country, or the normal process for waiting for a family petition to be filed and then a visa to become available. Lots of information. Okay, how can people get more information or assistance? I'm going to leave this email up for a little bit. I will say that we are working as quickly and accurately as we can to screen all the parolees. So if they send us an email saying, when can you screen me? I mean, our response is, we're doing our best. We're working our way through. According to date of arrival, unless the caseworker has individual information that requires the screening process to be expedited. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. And so an example of why we would expedite the screening process would be, we do have some children who arrived without parents. They are not considered unaccompanied minors. They are considered attached minors. They're here in Richmond, not with the parents, but they are with an uncle or an aunt or a grandmother. Another reason would be, well, now we get more convoluted into the intricacies of immigration law. Okay, so if Helen nods her head up and down, I will go through the chat and start answering questions. All right, do they have I-94 records? Yes, they do. The caseworker can assist them obtain their own I-94. We have resources on how to do it. We have resources that explain how to get your I-94 from the internet in English, in Dari, and in Pashto. I don't know if there's an audio video recording for people who cannot read any of those languages. We also have instructions on how to do it with an iPhone by taking a picture of your face because the DHS has, their biometrics on file. Do parolees know that they are parolees? Yes, they should know they are parolees. As soon as they are introduced to a caseworker, the caseworker explains that they are a parolee, and they are shown a PowerPoint very similar to the one I just showed that talks about temporary, it's a temporary status. You have employment authorization. We have that PowerPoint in English, Dari, and Pashto, and we have a video of the PowerPoint where the overlay explanation is in Dari, and then the overlay explanation is in Pashto. So I know that the caseworkers are doing a good, I assume that the caseworkers are doing a great job getting that information out, but during the immigration screening process, they receive the PowerPoint presentation again. And Soraya will ask, how would you like it? Would you like a visual PowerPoint that you can read, or would you like the audio video? And I can send it to you as an attachment to an email, or I can put it in the WhatsApp chat that we're talking on, or I can text it to you, and they can even just listen to it if they don't want to watch the video. So, but yes, they don't know the term, right? Because it's like a term that they've never heard before. And for some of you, you're thinking, well, I've never heard it before either, except in the criminal justice system when people get paroled out of jail. So, right. What are the financial barriers to obtaining legal representation? Is there pro bono service? Okay, so right now, if the if the SIV eligible person is ready to file the application for the green card, the IRC is doing this without charging any fee. We are doing it for zero cost to the permanent resident, and there is zero government fee involved. Asylum, our office does not have the capacity to provide pro bono representation to 330 people or 110 families. We are currently at a higher level, headquarters level, working with various organizations to assist with pro bono models for asylum. At the local level, I've reached out to some local Richmond law firms that have expressed interest, and to be determined. But there is the normal procedure for people who enter the United States and request and want to apply for asylum is they go to a private immigration attorney and enter into a contract and get placed on a payment plan, and they pay their own attorney to file asylum. Now, the normal process is very difficult for those applicants because they do not receive employment authorization right away. The good news, if you want to call it that, I mean, there is no good news when you have to pay an attorney for services, right? But these parolees do have employment authorization right away. I'm not expressing any opinion about whether a parolee should go out and find a private attorney and get on a payment plan, or wait, or file asylum on his or her own. There are big reasons why any person should not simply fill out the asylum form and submit it on their own. And the biggest reason right now is it's last in, first out. So from the date that asylum application is submitted, there will be an interview within 45 days. And based on my conversations with a working group of attorneys who are tracking these asylum cases, the same questions and requirements to prove asylum are being adhered to. So it's not a slam dunk by any means. So if people go in and apply for their asylum on their own and they are not prepared they risk having the asylum not be granted. Okay. Let's see, what family members qualify for a family petition? All right, so this is, I'll mention it very quickly, but generally, United States citizens who want to apply for their spouses, unmarried children under the 18 years and or younger, or parents can apply. And then there is an immediate visa. United States citizens who apply for their brothers, sisters, married children, they can apply, but then there's a long wait for the visa. And so if any of the parolees have United States relatives, you know, a brother or sister, that brother or sister could submit the petition, and then the parolee would have to keep the parole continuing until the visa is available, which could be 14, 15 years. If people with green cards, however, are limited to their husband or wife or their children. Can you say more about what you were screening for? The paths to a green card. Where people are in the SIV process. So the first question, well, we do have a script, and we explain to the parolee that we're gathering information to provide them an array of opportunities for permanent residence, that we are not entering into a client-attorney relationship. The information they provide is voluntary. They don't have to do it. We screen them first to see if they already have an attorney, because if that's the case, then we are not going to interfere with that relationship. And then we ask, we just get the basics, making sure that we have identified any children in the house who are not their children, that unattached minor that I mentioned earlier. We say, do you think you are SIV eligible? What did you do for work back in Afghanistan before you arrived? And then we just basically ask the questions. Do you have your employment verification letter? Have you received your chief of mission? Have you applied? Have you sent in your I-360? And if they know what these are, then they know if they've done it or not. If they don't know what these are, then they probably haven't done it. And you know, we then understand that where they are in the SIV process. And then we ask, do you have a United States citizen relative? And we go through the different categories. And then we ask, do you have a permanent resident relative? And we go through the different categories for which there's a possible family petition. And we ask, has anybody in your family received asylum? And then if and so far I haven't seen any yeses, but you know, depending on when the asylum grant was given, there are other paths. And then we don't ask them to relive the trauma of what they were just, that they just experienced, because at that point, asylum is all that's left. If we've screened out all the other paths, and we ask their permission if we can contact them in the near future for potential asylum workshops and more information. During the screening process, Soraya also talks about parole again, how they have to maintain their status and at a minimum contact the IRC 6 months before their parole status expires, you know, at a minimum. If they meet criteria, will they get a legal service agreement? Only if they say, yes, Diane, I would be happy for you to help me submit my green card application based on my SIV status. who approves housing? What are the requirements? I'm going to defer that to the resettlement side, and that we have a process that's been in place since the IRC first opened its doors in Virginia to ensure that the housing that we refer the guests, our customers to, is safe and habitable, and we enter into negotiations with landlords for the terms of the first-year lease. Is there a place where we can find those instructions? Instructions for what? I'll wait for you to clarify that. Is it better for the children to have, I'm not sure what URM status is. Attached status is better than unaccompanied. Well, okay, so we're getting into the weeds of immigration law. If they had unaccompanied minor status, there are certain benefits in the asylum pathway, but attached, so, you know, the practicality of having attached status is the family unit that you entered into the United States with remains your family unit now. So when the parents hand off the 3-year-old daughter to the grandmother over the fence, that 3-year-old granddaughter stays with the grandmother, pardon me. Okay, if a church wants to learn about sponsoring a family, cody.frost@rescue.com. I'm going to put that in the chat. .rescue.org can explain the church sponsorship program. Let's see. There are some Afghans who still don't have caseworkers. How can, I don't know about that. Okay, this is important. The IRC has a capacity to assist a certain amount of people. And so, and by the way, the IRC is hiring. So you can go on our employment page and see all the many positions for which we recently received funding to hire additional employees. But the IRC, just like any organization, any store, restaurant, business, has a capacity to serve X number of customers. So Richmond at this point is at capacity. And so how did we reach capacity? When the Afghans arrived at the airport, they were given a choice to leave on their own or go to a military base where there was a process where they would undergo medical exams, vaccines, and then be assigned to a resettlement agency. And then IOM, which is the normal agency that assigns refugees to resettlement agencies, said to Richmond, these are the people we would like to send to you because they have families close by, or they have requested to come to Richmond. We also, so those people we've accepted. We've also had some people early on in the process who chose to not go to the military base and then asked the Richmond office, can you help me? And so the Richmond office looked at their situation and made a decision, yes, we can, or no, we can't. But at this point, and we call those walk-ins, right? They didn't really have a scheduled appointment. They didn't have a scheduled arrival. It would be almost like if you were, you booked your hotel reservation in advance, or you just showed up at the hotel and said you have a room. So at this point, we are at capacity. We are not accepting any more walk-ins as of today. So, right. So I hope that answers Peyton's question. Type a new one, Peyton, if it didn't. Okay, so if you've met families through the local Afghan friend, again, reach out to Cody. Now, I will say there are 2 resettlement agencies in Richmond, right? There's the IRC and then there's Catholic Charities. And so we can't really facilitate anything if we are not the resettlement agency. We cannot take responsibility or get involved in any families that are currently receiving services from Catholic Charities. How is COVID complicating all of this? No, we are not acting as if COVID did not exist. We are following all COVID protocols. And I would say the biggest way it's impacting is that from an immigration, from my standpoint, our Soraya and I are communicating with the parolees over the telephone or on a WhatsApp video conference call. And I have not done a Zoom with any, so most of the parolees understand WhatsApp, like it's just WhatsApp seems to be the go-to, which is actually more efficient, right? Because the parolees, they don't have driver's licenses. And if I required them to come to the office, what a burden, right? What a burden on a family that is still, you know, looking around and saying like, wow, like, I can't believe I'm here. And then we say, oh yeah, book an Uber and come on down for a one-on-one. So how many Afghan families I don't know how many Afghan families are in Richmond that are not connected to a resettlement agency, because I would not have been the person who had to say to them, I'm sorry, I'm sorry you chose not to go through a military base. I have no judgment. I have no judgment on that decision. I was a JAG in the Army for 4 years, and I know, like, the military bases, it's hurry up and wait. And so there's no judgment on whether, you know, the decision to not process through the military base, but to come off the airplane and go to a welcoming, you know, relative who's in the United States. But I'm not the person who tracked the number of people to whom we had to say, I'm sorry, we cannot accept your case. I will say that, you know, there is a certain pot of money available for this Operation Allies Welcome parolee families. And another decision they had to make was to take that pot of money and forego resettlement services or opt for resettlement services. Are there any other questions? And if anybody, I don't know if anybody is allowed to raise their hand and ask a verbal question. Okay, I'm helping an Afghan. They're now living undocumented as, so Lindsay, again, humanitarian parole is not meant to be a get around of the normal process. So if they have an active process of trying to obtain SIV status, you know, I suggest that they continue to follow that. And then they are potentially eligible to sign up for the refugees process. But I can't comment on that. I can't give advice. You know, it's like such a tricky situation for this group of people, and they have to understand their options and make individual choices based on their families' needs. So realistic, that's the crux, isn't it? In my opinion, I don't know how realistic it would be. Any other questions? Okay. I hope it's more clear. All right, then I get to leave early. We can leave early and I'll stretch. Thank you so much for these questions. I so appreciate your willingness to learn the intricacies of their immigration status. And Richmond is just so welcoming to all of our clients and immigrants in general. I really appreciate how each one of you has created to that welcoming atmosphere. Take care.
Thank you, Diane, for the work you're doing and for your clarity. It really was clear. So that's great.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.